On March 8, 2025, home security camera captures Marcus Mitchell arriving at his house at 4:32 in the afternoon, returning from his shift at the Toyota plant. This is the same camera 4 hours and 17 minutes later, showing Marcus dragging a large black tarp from his garage to his truck bed. Inside that tarp is the body of his 29-year-old wife, Sarah. 8 months earlier, Marcus purchased life insurance policies covering $100,000 on his own life and $500,000 on Sarah's. Sarah's best friend had never heard about this policy. Neither had her mother. The insurance agent would later testify that Marcus never brought Sarah to a single appointment and provided all of her information himself. On March 8, 2025, Sarah Mitchell had been reported missing by her husband, Marcus Mitchell, just 9 hours earlier at 9:53 the previous night. Detective Harris immediately flagged this timeline as suspicious. Missing person reports filed late at night, followed by a body discovery the next morning, typically indicated one thing. Someone close to the victim knew exactly what happened and was establishing an alibi. The detectives wasted no time beginning their investigation. Their first stop was the home of Sarah's mother, Patricia Reynolds, who lived approximately 15 minutes from the crime scene on Greenwood Avenue. Patricia answered the door in her bathrobe. The time was 8:32 in the morning. The detectives identified themselves and delivered the devastating news about her daughter. As the words sank in, Patricia's world spun into disorientation. The familiar scent of brewed coffee that usually brought comfort now felt overwhelming. Her vision blurred as tears filled her eyes, and the sound of her own heartbeat thundered in her ears, drowning out the detectives' voices. She collapsed against the doorframe, her screams echoing through the quiet suburban neighborhood. Officers helped her inside and waited for her to compose herself enough to answer questions, allowing her the space to feel the reality of her loss before engaging in the procedural inquiries. Patricia explained that she had last seen her daughter the previous afternoon, around 3 o'clock. Sarah had stopped by for their weekly coffee visit. They sat in the kitchen for nearly 2 hours discussing ordinary things: work schedules, upcoming holidays, and a recipe Patricia wanted to share. Nothing about Sarah's demeanor suggested anything was wrong. She seemed happy, relaxed, exactly like herself. Patricia described her son-in-law, Marcus, as a good provider who worked at the Toyota manufacturing plant on the outskirts of Bowling Green. The couple had been married for 2 years after dating for 18 months. They had recently purchased a house on Shady Grove Drive and seemed to be building a stable life together. Patricia noticed no signs of trouble in their marriage. No arguments, no tension, nothing that would indicate violence was brewing beneath the surface. Her grief appeared genuine and unguarded. She answered every question through tears, her hands shaking as she provided contact information for Sarah's closest friend. The apartment was small but tidy, with photographs of Rebecca and Sarah covering most available surfaces. Pictures from high school, college, weddings, and birthday parties. One particularly cherished photo depicted the two friends grinning with matching Halloween costumes from their freshman year at college, a prank they pulled off flawlessly on their dorm mates by pretending to swap identities for the entire day. It was a day filled with laughter and camaraderie that cemented their bond. Rebecca sat on her couch, clutching a tissue, and began answering questions before the detectives even asked them. She needed to talk. She needed someone to understand what she had been seeing for months. The apartment was small but tidy, with photographs of Rebecca and Sarah covering most available surfaces. Pictures from high school, college, weddings, and birthday parties. A friendship that spanned more than 15 years, documented in frames and magnets. Rebecca sat on her couch, clutching a tissue, and began answering questions before the detectives even asked them. She needed to talk. She needed someone to understand what she had been seeing for months. Rebecca described the early days of Sarah and Marcus's relationship as seemingly perfect. Marcus was charming and attentive during their courtship. He brought Sarah flowers, planned elaborate dates, and sent thoughtful text messages throughout the day. Sarah's friends were happy for her. After a difficult breakup 2 years before meeting Marcus, Sarah deserved someone who treated her well. But approximately 6 months into the marriage, Rebecca started noticing changes in her best friend's behavior. Sarah began canceling plans at the last minute: lunch dates, movie nights, and their weekly yoga class, always with an excuse. Marcus needed her help with something. She wasn't feeling well. Work had exhausted her. When Rebecca did manage to see Sarah, something felt different. Sarah seemed nervous, constantly checking her phone, looking over her shoulder. Her laugh didn't sound genuine anymore. The ease that had always existed between them felt strained and forced. 3 weeks before Sarah's murder, the two women met for lunch at a cafe downtown. It was one of the rare occasions Sarah didn't cancel. During their meal, as Sarah reached across the table for the salt shaker, her sleeve pulled back, revealing a dark purple bruise on her upper arm. The bruise was roughly the size and shape of fingers, like the imprints left when someone grips hard enough to leave their mark. Rebecca noticed how Sarah flinched slightly when she brushed her arm against the table, and how the skin, even though cool to the touch, seemed to throb with a muted pulse of pain. Rebecca immediately asked about it. Sarah's response came too quickly, too rehearsed. She said she fell while playing with their dog and hit the corner of the kitchen counter. Rebecca didn't believe the explanation. She had known Sarah for over a decade and could always tell when her friend was lying. The way Sarah's eyes shifted away, the slight tremor in her voice, and the defensive posture she adopted when pressed for details. But Rebecca didn't push. She wanted to respect Sarah's boundaries, even though every instinct told her something was seriously wrong. That same week, during that same lunch, Sarah asked Rebecca a question that stayed with her. She asked if Rebecca thought divorce was always the answer, or if sometimes people should just accept that marriage is hard and requires sacrifice. The question caught Rebecca off guard. Sarah had never mentioned marital problems before. Rebecca tried to probe deeper, asking what prompted such a heavy question, but Sarah immediately backtracked. She claimed she was just thinking philosophically that a coworker had been discussing her own marriage troubles. Rebecca let it drop, but the conversation haunted her. Now her best friend was dead, and that question took on horrifying new meaning. Detective Chen then revealed information that made Rebecca's face drain of color. According to a preliminary investigation, Marcus Mitchell had taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy on Sarah 8 months earlier. Rebecca had no knowledge of this policy. Sarah had never mentioned it, despite the fact that she and Rebecca discussed virtually everything in their lives: major purchases, career decisions, family drama. A life insurance policy of that size should have been significant enough to warrant at least a casual mention. The fact that Sarah never brought it up suggested she either didn't know about it or felt uncomfortable discussing it. Armed with this crucial information about the life insurance policy, and Rebecca's observations about the bruise and Sarah's changing behavior, Detectives Harris and Chen drove directly to the Mitchell residence. The time was 10:37 in the morning. Marcus Mitchell's Ford F-150 pickup truck sat in the driveway. The lawn was freshly mowed with perfectly straight lines. The hedges were trimmed with precise edges. Garden beds showed no weeds. Everything appeared normal, suburban, unremarkable. The kind of house that belongs in a real estate advertisement. Marcus Mitchell answered the door on the second knock. He wore gray sweatpants and a wrinkled white t-shirt. His hair was slightly disheveled. His eyes showed redness around the rims, but the eyeballs themselves appeared dry. No tears stained his cheeks. No tissues clutched in his hands. he identified himself and invited the detectives inside without hesitation. The interior of the home immediately struck both investigators as unusual for someone who had just lost their spouse. The living room was immaculate, not a single item out of place. Throw pillows were arranged symmetrically on the couch. Magazines were stacked in perfect alignment on the coffee table. No dishes were visible in the sink from the entryway. No clutter was anywhere. The detectives had investigated dozens of homicides over their careers. Grieving family members never maintained this level of perfect order. Grief is messy. It means unwashed dishes pile up, laundry is left in baskets, and surfaces get covered with used tissues and forgotten coffee mugs. This house looked like it was staged for showing to potential buyers. Marcus gestured for the detectives to sit. He took a seat in an armchair across from him, his posture upright and controlled. Detective Harris began with standard questions, asking Marcus to walk through his activities from the previous day. Marcus explained that he woke around 6 in the morning. He made coffee in the kitchen while Sarah remained asleep upstairs. He left for his shift at the Toyota plant around 7 o'clock. His shift ran from 7:30 in the morning until 4:30 in the afternoon. He clocked out at exactly 4:28, according to factory records. Marcus stated that when he arrived home around 5:30 in the evening, Sarah was not there. He claimed this didn't immediately concern him because Sarah often visited her mother or met up with Rebecca after her nursing shifts at the medical center. He made himself dinner, watched television, and started trying to reach Sarah around 10 o'clock when she still hadn't returned home or responded to his text messages. Her cell phone went straight to voicemail. He called Patricia. He called Rebecca. Neither had seen Sarah that evening. That's when he contacted the police to file a missing person report at 9:53 at night. Marcus's delivery throughout this explanation was measured and controlled. His voice remained steady without the breaks or catches typical of fresh grief. His breathing stayed even and regular. His hands rested motionless on the arms of the chair, not fidgeting or clenching as people under stress typically did. There were no tears forming in his eyes, despite discussing his wife's disappearance and death. The detectives observed all of these details carefully, noting each absence of expected emotional response. Detective Chen asked if Marcus could think of anyone who would want to hurt his wife. Marcus responded that everyone loved Sarah. She worked as a registered nurse in the intensive care unit at Bowling Green Medical Center. She was kind, patient, and dedicated to helping others. She had no enemies that he knew of, no conflicts at work, no disputes with neighbors or friends. Detective Harris then pivoted to questions about the marriage itself. He asked how things had been between Marcus and Sarah recently. Marcus stated they were fine, happy, with no significant problems. Work kept them both busy, but they made time for each other when they could. Detective Chen mentioned speaking with Rebecca Hoffman earlier that morning. She brought up that Rebecca had noticed Sarah seemed stressed in recent months. Marcus acknowledged that Sarah's job was demanding. The intensive care unit meant long 12-hour shifts dealing with critically ill patients. The stress was natural, given her work environment. Then Detective Chen asked directly about the bruise Rebecca had seen on Sarah's arm 3 weeks prior. For the first time since the detectives arrived, Marcus's controlled facade showed a crack. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The muscles in his neck became more defined. He stated that Sarah had tripped over their dog and fallen against the kitchen counter. The bruise was nothing serious. Detective Harris noted that they saw no evidence of a dog in the home. No food bowls, no toys, no pet bed, no smell of an animal. Marcus explained they had to rehome the dog last month due to allergies. When asked about whose allergies, Marcus stated his own. He claimed he suddenly developed severe reactions, and they had no choice but to find the dog a new home through a rescue organization. The detectives noted this explanation, but didn't press the obvious holes in his story. Why would someone adopt a dog if they had allergies? Why would allergies develop suddenly after months of living with an animal? They filed these inconsistencies away for later. Detective Harris then asked the question directly. Did you harm your wife in any way? Marcus's face contorted into what appeared to be anguish. His eyebrows drew together. His mouth turned downward. His shoulders hunched forward slightly. But despite this performance of distress, no tears formed in his eyes. His voice cracked as he responded, asking how they could even ask such a question. He stated that Sarah was everything to him. He loved her more than anything in the world. She was his entire world. They had their whole lives planned ahead of them. The emotional display seemed practiced, rehearsed, lacking the genuine rawness that characterized real grief. Detective Harris responded calmly, stating that someone clearly didn't feel that way about Sarah, given that she was found murdered. Marcus repeated that he didn't understand what they were implying. Detective Chen informed him that they needed him to come to the police station for a formal statement. They also needed to collect the clothing he had worn the previous day for forensic analysis. Marcus asked if he was under arrest. Detective Harris clarified that he was not being arrested at this time, but that providing a formal statement and surrendering his clothing was standard procedure in any homicide investigation where the spouse was the last known person to see the victim alive. Marcus stood slowly and said he needed to get his shoes from the bedroom. While Marcus was out of the room, Detective Chen quickly photographed the living room and kitchen areas with her phone. The smell of bleach was faint but detectable in the kitchen. Fresh cleaning supplies sat under the sink. The trash can was empty with a new liner despite it being mid-morning. The detectives drove Marcus to the Bowling Green Police Department, arriving at 11:23 in the morning. During the 15-minute drive, Marcus remained completely silent. He stared out the passenger window at the passing scenery. His affect was flat, emotionless, showing none of the anxiety or distress someone would typically display when being brought in for questioning about their spouse's murder. He didn't ask questions about the investigation. He didn't protest his innocence. He simply sat in manufactured calm that felt profoundly wrong to both experienced detectives. At the station, Marcus was placed in interview room 2. The room measured approximately 10 feet by 12 feet with gray walls, fluorescent lighting, and minimal furniture. A metal table sat in the center with 3 uncomfortable chairs. A camera mounted in the corner recorded both video and audio. The room's design was deliberately stark and uncomfortable, meant to create psychological pressure that encouraged confession. Marcus was offered water, which he accepted. Detective Harris began by reading Marcus his Miranda rights. Marcus confirmed he understood each right as explained. When asked if he wished to speak with them, Marcus stated he had nothing to hide and would answer any questions. This confidence struck the detectives as unusual. Most innocent people brought in for questioning about a spouse's murder displayed visible anxiety, even knowing they had done nothing wrong. The situation itself generated stress. Marcus showed none of that natural human response. Detective Harris opened a folder containing photographs from the crime scene. He informed Marcus that his wife's body was discovered in Riverwalk Park that morning. Marcus acknowledged he was familiar with the location. He stated that he and Sarah had visited that park dozens of times together over the years. It was one of their favorite spots for walking on weekends when the weather permitted. When asked when he last visited Riverwalk Park, Marcus claimed it had been at least a month ago, possibly longer. He couldn't recall the exact date. Detective Chen produced a receipt from her own folder. The receipt was from the Shell gas station on Porter Pike, dated the previous day at 4:47 in the afternoon. Marcus's credit card had been used to purchase $14.32 worth of regular unleaded gasoline. The Shell station on Porter Pike sat approximately 3 miles from Riverwalk Park. More importantly, That gas station was nowhere near the route between the Toyota plant where Marcus worked and his home on Shady Grove Drive. In fact, the station was in the complete opposite direction, requiring Marcus to drive at least 20 minutes out of his way. Marcus shifted slightly in his chair for the first time since the interview began. He explained that he stopped for gas on his way home from work because his fuel light had come on. When pressed about why he chose that particular station so far from both his workplace and home, Marcus claimed he took a different route home that day because traffic was bad on his usual roads. Detective Harris pointed out that 4:47 in the afternoon on a Wednesday typically wasn't peak traffic time in Bowling Green. Marcus insisted there had been an accident or construction, something that forced him to detour. Detective Harris looked directly at Marcus. "We need to talk about the life insurance policy, Marcus. The one for $500,000 you took out on Sarah 8 months ago." Marcus blinked slowly, his face mostly neutral, though his pupils betrayed a flicker of reaction. "The policy? It's just financial planning," he replied, trying to keep his tone steady. "Sarah and I, we were building a life together. Protecting each other was just smart." Detective Chen leaned in slightly. "Did she know about the policy, Marcus? Did the two of you actually discuss it?" Marcus nodded, a bit too quickly. "Of course she knew. We talked about it before I bought it. You know, being responsible." Detective Harris didn't move, but the weight of the question hung in the air. "Funny," he said, "because it didn't sound like she was aware of it when we spoke to her friend Rebecca and her mother." Marcus insisted he didn't kill his wife. Detective Chen then asked a question that cut through all the pretense. She asked why Marcus couldn't cry. Marcus asked what she meant. Detective Chen stated that he had been sitting in that interview room for 20 minutes, claiming he loved his wife, claiming she was his entire world, but he hadn't shed a single tear. Not one. His eyes were dry. His face showed no evidence of crying earlier that day. Even people who tried to hold themselves together for interviews typically broke down at some point when discussing their murdered spouse. Marcus responded that everyone grieves differently. Detective Harris agreed that it was true, but pointed out that Marcus hadn't grieved at all. He had performed grief with facial expressions and tone of voice, but shown no genuine emotional distress. There was a distinct difference between actual grief and theatrical grief, and Marcus was displaying the latter. Marcus's hands finally moved, clenching into fists on the metal table. He stated that the detectives didn't know what they were talking about. Detective Harris told him to help them understand then. "Walk through the previous day again, and this time don't leave anything out." Marcus took a deep breath and began recounting his day again. He woke at 6 in the morning like he did every weekday. Sarah was still asleep when he got up. He showered, got dressed in his work uniform, and went downstairs to make coffee. He poured himself a travel mug and left the house at 7 o'clock. The drive to the Toyota plant took approximately 25 minutes, depending on traffic. He clocked in at 7:28, 2 minutes before his shift officially started at 7:30. Detective Harris asked what Marcus did during his lunch break. Marcus explained that he took his lunch from 12:30 to 1:15 in the afternoon. He ate in the break room with several co-workers. They discussed the upcoming NASCAR race that weekend and complained about the overtime schedule being reduced. After lunch, he returned to his station on the assembly line where he installed door panels on Camry models. His afternoon proceeded normally until his shift ended at 4:30. Detective Chen asked Marcus to be very specific about what happened after he clocked out. Marcus stated he walked to his truck in the employee parking lot. He sat in the vehicle for a few minutes, scrolling through his phone, checking messages and social media. He started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot at approximately 4:38. Detective Harris interrupted to ask if anyone could verify that timeline. Marcus said the plant had security cameras in the parking lot that would show him leaving. Marcus continued that he drove toward home, but realized his fuel gauge was close to empty. He decided to stop for gas rather than risk running out. He took an exit he didn't normally use because he saw a sign for a Shell station. That's how he ended up at the Porter Pike location. He pumped gas, paid at the pump with his credit card, and got back on the road. The whole stop took maybe 7 or 8 minutes. He arrived home around 5:35 that evening. Detective Chen asked what Marcus did when he got home and discovered Sarah wasn't there. Marcus stated he wasn't immediately concerned. He changed out of his work clothes into comfortable clothes. He checked the refrigerator to see what was available for dinner. Sarah had meal prepped chicken and vegetables earlier in the week, so he heated that up in the microwave. He ate while watching the news. After dinner, he washed his dish and put it away. He moved to the living room and watched television for several hours. Around 9:45, Marcus claimed he started wondering why Sarah hadn't come home yet or called. He sent her a text message asking where she was. When she didn't respond after 10 minutes, he called her cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. He called again 5 minutes later with the same result. That's when he started calling other people. First her mother, Patricia, then her friend, Rebecca. Neither had heard from Sarah that evening. Patricia said Sarah left her house around 5:15 the previous afternoon. Rebecca said she hadn't spoken to Sarah in 3 days. Marcus stated that at that point he became genuinely worried. It wasn't like Sarah to be unreachable for hours. She always kept her phone charged and answered his calls or texts within a reasonable time. He decided to contact the police. He called the non-emergency line at 9:53 and reported his wife missing. The dispatcher took down all the relevant information and told him an officer would follow up. Marcus said he stayed awake until almost 3 in the morning, hoping Sarah would come home or call. He finally fell asleep on the couch. Detective Harris asked if Marcus tried to locate Sarah himself before calling police. Did he drive around looking for her car? Did he check the hospital? Did he go to any of her usual places? Marcus admitted he didn't do any of those things. He said he assumed if something was wrong, the police were better equipped to find her than he was. This struck both detectives as odd. Most spouses would immediately jump in their car and start searching. They would call every hospital within 50 miles. They would drive to friends' houses knocking on doors. Marcus had simply stayed home and watched television. Detective Chen asked Marcus to describe his relationship with Sarah in detail. Marcus stated they met through a dating app 3.5 years earlier. Their first date was at an Italian restaurant downtown. They hit it off immediately. Sarah was beautiful, smart, and compassionate. Everything he wanted in a partner. They dated for 18 months before he proposed. The proposal happened at Riverwalk Park during a sunset picnic. Sarah said yes without hesitation. They were married 4 months later in a small ceremony at a local venue with about 60 guests. After the wedding, they moved into an apartment together while saving money for a house. Sarah worked extra shifts at the hospital. Marcus took on overtime whenever the plant offered it. They saved aggressively for 14 months until they had enough for a down payment. They closed on the house on Shady Grove Drive 8 months ago. Detective Harris asked if there were any problems in the marriage. Arguments about money, intimacy, and future plans? Marcus insisted everything was fine. They rarely fought. When they did disagree, it was about minor things, like what to watch on television, or whose turn it was to take out the trash. Nothing serious, nothing worth mentioning. They were building a good life together. Both had stable jobs. They talked about having children in a few years, once they were more financially secure. Detective Chen circled back to the life insurance policy. She asked Marcus to explain the exact circumstances of purchasing that policy. When did he first consider it? What prompted the decision? Did he research different companies, or did someone approach him? Marcus explained that a financial advisor came to the Toyota plant about 9 months ago, offering free consultations to employees. The advisor talked about the importance of life insurance for young couples. He met with the advisor during his lunch break one day. The advisor ran numbers showing how much coverage Marcus should carry. They discussed his income, his mortgage, his debts. The advisor recommended a $500,000 policy on each spouse. Marcus said he purchased policies on both himself and Sarah. He provided Sarah's information, including her social security number and birth date. The advisor handled all the paperwork. Marcus just signed the documents. He paid the first premium out of his checking account. Detective Harris asked if Sarah also signed paperwork. Marcus claimed the advisor said only the policyholder needed to sign in Kentucky, as long as the insured person gave verbal consent. Marcus said he told Sarah about it that evening, and she agreed it was a smart decision. Detective Chen noted that the policy on Marcus's own life was only for $100,000 according to their records, not $500,000. The policies were not equal, as Marcus had just claimed. Marcus stumbled over his response, saying maybe he misremembered the exact amounts. Detective Harris then brought up something that made Marcus noticeably uncomfortable. Cell phone records showed that Sarah's phone last pinged off a tower near Riverwalk Park at 5:48 the previous evening. Marcus had claimed he was home by 5:35. Sarah's phone placed her near the park around the same time Marcus was supposedly settling in at home. But Marcus's own phone records showed his device was also near that same tower at 5:41 in the evening. The tower covered the area, including Riverwalk Park, the Shell station on Porter Pike, and several residential streets. Marcus maintained that he stopped for gas at that Shell station. That's why his phone pinged that tower. He was nowhere near the actual park. Detective Chen pointed out that the Shell station was approximately 2.5 miles from the park. Phone towers typically have a range of 1 to 3 miles depending on obstacles and terrain. If Marcus was only at the gas station, his phone likely would have pinged a different tower. The specific tower that registered both phones suggested both Marcus and Sarah were closer to Riverwalk Park itself. Marcus insisted the detectives were reading too much into tower locations. Cell phone tracking wasn't exact science. Maybe the other towers were busy, and his phone connected to a farther one. Maybe atmospheric conditions affected the signal. He couldn't explain the technical details, but he knew he wasn't at the park. He was at the gas station, then drove straight home. Detective Harris asked if Marcus would consent to a search of his vehicle and his home. Marcus hesitated for the first time in the interview, showing genuine uncertainty. He asked if he needed a lawyer. Detective Harris stated that was his right, but also pointed out that innocent people typically had no problem consenting to searches. They wanted to prove their innocence and cooperate fully with the investigation. Guilty people asked for lawyers and refused searches because they had something to hide. Which category did Marcus fall into? Marcus sat silently for nearly 30 seconds. The detectives let the silence hang. Finally, Marcus said he would consent to searches. He had nothing to hide. He wanted them to find whoever killed his wife. Detective Chen left the interview room to arrange for forensic teams to process Marcus's truck and home. Detective Harris remained with Marcus, asking additional background questions. He asked about Sarah's job at the hospital. Did she ever mention problems with patients or their families? Had anyone made threats? Had any patient deaths resulted in complaints or lawsuits? Marcus said Sarah rarely discussed specific patient situations due to privacy laws. She would come home exhausted and stressed, but she didn't share details about individual cases. Detective Harris asked about Sarah's routine. What time did she usually get home from work? Did she work the same shift every week, or did it rotate? Marcus explained that Sarah worked 3 12-hour shifts per week, usually Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday from 7 in the morning until 7:30 at night. She occasionally picked up extra shifts if the unit was short-staffed. On her days off, she usually slept late, ran errands, meal prepped for the week, or met up with Rebecca or her mother. The previous day was Wednesday. Sarah wasn't scheduled to work. Marcus said she mentioned wanting to organize the garage and maybe plant some flowers in the front beds. He didn't know what she actually ended up doing because he was at work all day. He hadn't called or texted her during his shift. That wasn't unusual. They often went the whole day without communicating if they were both busy. Detective Chen returned to the interview room with an update. Forensic teams were en route to both locations. She also brought new information that significantly changed the tone of the conversation. Crime scene investigators had found something interesting in Sarah's car, which had been located in the Riverwalk Park parking lot. The vehicle was locked with Sarah's purse still inside on the passenger seat. Her phone was in the purse. Also in the vehicle was a receipt from a Walmart dated the previous day at 2:37 in the afternoon. The receipt showed Sarah purchased potting soil, annual flowers, gardening gloves, and a small hand trowel. She spent $33.16. The items were not in her car. They weren't at the park. The detectives wanted to know where those gardening supplies were. Marcus suggested maybe she stopped home and unloaded them before going back out. But that didn't make sense. If she had been home, why would she leave again? Where would she go? And why would her car end up back at the park? Detective Harris proposed a different theory. Sarah went to Walmart and bought gardening supplies intending to plant flowers at home. But she never made it home. Someone intercepted her. That someone convinced her or forced her to drive to Riverwalk Park. That someone killed her near the creek bed and left her body there. Then that someone took her car keys and moved her vehicle to the parking lot to make it look like Sarah had driven there herself. The gardening supplies were disposed of somewhere to remove evidence. Marcus shook his head, insisting that theory didn't make sense. Who would do that? Random killers didn't operate that way. If someone wanted to rob her, they would have taken her purse. If someone wanted to assault her, they wouldn't move the car afterward. The scenario the detective described sounded too planned, too calculated. It sounded like someone who knew Sarah and knew the park. Detective Chen agreed completely. It absolutely sounded like someone who knew the victim and the location well. Someone like a husband who proposed to his wife at that exact park. Marcus's face flushed red. He raised his voice for the first time, stating he didn't kill his wife. He was at work. He had an alibi. Dozens of people saw him at the plant. Detective Harris calmly pointed out that Marcus clocked out at 4:28. Sarah's phone was active until 5:48. That was a 1 hour and 20-minute window. The drive from the Toyota plant to Riverwalk Park took approximately 18 minutes. Marcus had plenty of time to intercept Sarah, kill her, stage the scene, and still make it home by the time he claimed. Detective Chen added another detail that made Marcus go silent. Sarah had defensive wounds on her hands, scratches and broken fingernails indicating she fought her attacker. The medical examiner would collect DNA from under those fingernails. If Marcus had nothing to hide, he should have no problem providing a DNA sample for comparison. Marcus asked if he was being accused. Detective Harris stated they were simply gathering evidence and eliminating possibilities. Providing DNA would help clear him if he was innocent. Marcus agreed to provide a DNA sample. A technician came into the interview room with a buccal swab kit. Marcus opened his mouth and allowed the inside of his cheek to be swabbed. The sample was sealed in an evidence bag and labeled. The technician left. Detective Harris informed Marcus that preliminary results would take at least 48 hours, but expedited analysis might provide answers sooner. Marcus asked if he could leave. Detective Chen said not yet. They had more questions. She asked Marcus to describe the last conversation he had with Sarah. Marcus said it was brief the morning before he left for work. Sarah was still in bed. He kissed her forehead and said he loved her. She mumbled something back, still half asleep. That was it. Nothing unusual or memorable. Detective Chen asked if they had argued recently about anything. Marcus insisted they hadn't. Their relationship was stable and conflict-free. Detective Harris brought up the statement from Rebecca about Sarah asking if divorce was always the answer. Marcus claimed he knew nothing about that. Sarah never mentioned divorce to him, never even hinted at unhappiness. If she was having doubts about their marriage, she kept them completely hidden from him. He seemed genuinely surprised by this information, or at least performed surprise convincingly. Detective Chen shifted topics to Marcus's activities the evening Sarah disappeared. She asked him to be very specific about what he watched on television. Marcus said he watched the local news from 6 to 7. Then he switched to a home improvement show on HGTV. After that, he scrolled through Netflix and settled on a documentary about space exploration. He couldn't remember the exact title. He watched it until around 9:30, then started trying to reach Sarah. The detectives asked if Marcus used his computer or tablet that evening. He said he briefly checked Facebook on his phone around 8 o'clock. He scrolled through his feed for maybe 10 minutes, but didn't post anything or interact with anyone. Detective Harris asked if they could examine Marcus's phone. Marcus unlocked it and handed it over without hesitation. Detective Harris scrolled through recent activity. The Facebook claim checked out. There was activity on the app at 8:07 in the evening. But there was also something else. Marcus's search history from the previous week showed several concerning queries. He had searched for information about life insurance payouts after suspicious deaths. He searched for how long police investigations typically take. He searched for whether life insurance companies investigate beneficiaries. He also searched for hiking trails in the Riverwalk Park area and the specific closing times for the park. All of these searches occurred in the 5 days leading up to Sarah's murder. When confronted with this search history, Marcus claimed he was just curious. After purchasing the life insurance policies, he wanted to understand how they worked. The searches about police investigations were related to a true crime podcast he had been listening to. The searches about Riverwalk Park were because he was thinking about taking Sarah there for an anniversary picnic. Everything had an innocent explanation, according to Marcus. None of it meant he was planning to kill his wife. Detective Chen asked why Marcus cleaned the house so thoroughly if he was supposedly distraught about his missing wife. Marcus claimed he cleaned that morning after the police called to inform him a body had been found. He needed something to do with his hands. Cleaning helped him process his emotions. Detective Harris pointed out that the smell of bleach in the kitchen was quite strong. Marcus must have used a significant amount. What exactly was he cleaning? Marcus said he scrubbed the counters, the sink, the floor. He did it obsessively because he couldn't sit still. Detective Chen asked if forensic teams would find blood in that kitchen. Marcus's eyes widened. He asked why there would be blood. Detective Chen didn't answer directly. She just repeated the question. Would they find blood? Marcus insisted they wouldn't because nothing happened in that kitchen. Sarah wasn't killed there. She was killed at the park. The detectives noted his phrasing. He stated with certainty where Sarah was killed, despite claiming to have no knowledge of the murder. Detective Harris asked Marcus to explain how he knew Sarah was killed at the park versus killed elsewhere and dumped there. Marcus backtracked, saying he assumed that's what happened based on what the detectives told him. He didn't actually know. He was just guessing. Detective Harris pointed out that they never specified where Sarah died. They only said her body was found at the park. Marcus was making assumptions that suggested guilty knowledge. The interview continued for another 40 minutes, with the detectives circling back to inconsistencies and pressing Marcus on timeline details. His story remained mostly consistent, but small cracks appeared. He couldn't remember what color shirt he wore to work. He couldn't recall if he locked the door when he left that morning. He wasn't certain whether he took his lunch break at 12:30 or 12:45. These minor memory gaps were normal, except Marcus had been absolutely certain about other details. Selective memory often indicated deception. Finally, Detective Chen informed Marcus that he was free to go, but needed to remain available for follow-up questions. He should not leave the Bowling Green area without informing them first. His truck would be held for processing, but they would arrange a ride home for him. Marcus asked how long they would keep his vehicle. Detective Harris said at least 72 hours, depending on what forensics found. Marcus nodded and stood to leave. Before he walked out, Detective Harris made one final statement. He told Marcus that they would find the truth. Physical evidence didn't lie. DNA didn't lie. Cell phone records didn't lie. If Marcus killed his wife, they would prove it. If someone else killed her, they would prove that too. But the evidence would tell the story, one way or another. Marcus left without responding. After Marcus departed, the two detectives sat in the interview room reviewing their notes. Detective Chen stated the obvious. Marcus Mitchell killed his wife. Every instinct and years of experience told her he was guilty. But instinct wasn't enough. They needed hard evidence. Detective Harris agreed. The circumstantial evidence was strong. Opportunity, means, motive through the life insurance policy. But they needed forensics to tie Marcus directly to the murder scene. The detectives walked down the hallway to the evidence processing area, where items from both crime scenes were being analyzed. The forensic team working on Sarah's clothing had already made a significant discovery. Her jacket had traces of carpet fibers that didn't match anything in her own vehicle. The fibers were gray with a specific weave pattern. The team would compare them to carpeting in Marcus's truck and the Mitchell home. Sarah's fingernail scrapings showed biological material that appeared to be skin cells. DNA analysis was already underway. Under magnification, the cells appeared to have come from scratches rather than casual contact. Sarah had clawed her attacker hard enough to get skin under her nails. If that DNA matched Marcus, it would be devastating evidence against him. The ligature marks on Sarah's neck showed a specific pattern. She had been strangled with something that left parallel impressions approximately 1 inch apart. Not hands, not a rope, but something else. The medical examiner theorized it might be a belt or a strap of some kind. The team processing Marcus's truck and home would be looking for any item that could match those marks. Detective Harris received a call from the team at the Mitchell residence. They had found something in the garage. The gardening supplies Sarah purchased from Walmart were hidden in a storage bin under a tarp in the corner of the garage. The soil bag had been opened. The flowers were wilting. The gloves and trowel still had price tags attached. This directly contradicted Marcus's suggestion that Sarah might have stopped home to drop off her purchases. Why would someone carefully hide new gardening supplies in the garage? Unless that someone was trying to conceal evidence that Sarah had come home. Unless that someone needed to explain away why those items weren't in Sarah's car at the park. The detectives immediately recognized the significance. This proved Sarah had been home after her Walmart trip. Someone at that house saw her. Someone at that house had the opportunity to harm her. The forensic team also found something else in the garage. A work belt belonging to Marcus showed fresh cleaning. The leather was damp and smelled strongly of saddle soap. Someone had scrubbed it recently and thoroughly. The belt was sent for analysis to see if it matched the ligature pattern on Sarah's neck. If microscopic traces of Sarah's DNA remained in the leather grain despite cleaning, it would provide the physical link investigators needed. Detective Chen's phone buzzed with a text from the medical examiner. Preliminary autopsy results were ready. The detectives drove to the county morgue, arriving at 3:17 in the afternoon. Dr. Patricia Walsh met them in her office with a thick file folder. She explained that Sarah Mitchell died from asphyxiation due to strangulation. The specific injury pattern indicated sustained pressure applied for approximately 3 to 4 minutes. Death would not have been instantaneous. Sarah would have remained conscious and struggling for at least 90 seconds before losing consciousness. The defensive wounds on Sarah's hands were extensive. Multiple fingernails were broken below the quick indicating violent struggle. bruising on her arms showed she had been grabbed and restrained forcibly. The bruising pattern on her upper arms matched hand-sized grips. The person who killed Sarah held her down or held her in place while strangling her. This wasn't a quick, impulsive act. This was sustained, deliberate murder that required physical strength and determination, while the victim fought desperately to survive. Dr. Walsh also noted something else significant. Sarah had a partially digested meal in her stomach. Based on the level of digestion, she had eaten approximately 2 to 3 hours before death. The stomach contents included chicken and vegetables consistent with the meal prep food Marcus said was in their refrigerator. This suggested Sarah had been home and eaten before going to or being taken to the park. It supported the theory that she had contact with someone at her house before her death. The detectives thanked Dr. Walsh and returned to the station. They now had a timeline forming. Sarah went to Walmart at 2:37 in the afternoon. She drove home sometime after that. She brought her gardening supplies inside where someone hid them in the garage. She ate a meal of chicken and vegetables. Then, sometime between 5 and 6 in the evening, she was strangled to death. Her body was taken to Riverwalk Park and left near the creek. Her car was moved to the parking lot. Her phone was placed in her purse to make it appear she had driven there herself. The only person who had access to the house, access to Sarah, and whose phone placed him near the park during the critical time window was Marcus Mitchell. The only person with a clear financial motive through a massive life insurance policy was Marcus Mitchell. The only person who showed no genuine grief despite claiming to love his wife desperately was Marcus Mitchell. The case against him was building piece by piece. Detective Harris convened a briefing with the full investigative team at 4:30 in the afternoon on March 9th. Forensic analysts, crime scene technicians, and the lead prosecutor gathered in the conference room to review all accumulated evidence. The case needed to be airtight before they could make an arrest. Circumstantial evidence alone wouldn't guarantee a conviction. They needed physical proof connecting Marcus Mitchell directly to his wife's murder. The forensic supervisor presented findings from Marcus's Ford F-150 pickup truck. The vehicle's interior had been recently cleaned with particular attention paid to the passenger seat and floor mat areas. Chemical testing revealed traces of blood on the passenger side door handle despite visible cleaning attempts. The blood was too degraded for immediate typing, but sufficient sample remained for DNA analysis. Results would be available within 24 to 48 hours. More significantly, fibers recovered from Sarah's jacket matched carpet fibers from the truck bed. Marcus's pickup had a spray-in bed liner installed over factory carpeting. Most of the original carpet was covered, but edges remained exposed near the wheel wells. The fiber match indicated Sarah's body had contact with that specific area of the truck. This directly contradicted Marcus's claim that he never saw Sarah after leaving for work that morning. Investigators also found fresh scratches on the truck's tailgate. The scratches formed a pattern consistent with something heavy being dragged across the surface. Microscopic paint transfer analysis showed the scratches were made within the past 48 hours based on oxidation levels. The detectives theorized Marcus had dragged Sarah's body from the tailgate into the truck bed before transporting her to the park. The team processing the Mitchell home reported their findings next. The work belt from the garage was a critical piece of evidence. Despite aggressive cleaning, forensic analysis revealed minute traces of epithelial cells embedded in the leather's grain. The belt measured 1.2 inches wide with a distinctive textured pattern from its metal buckle and prong. When photographed and measured, this pattern aligned perfectly with the ligature marks on Sarah Mitchell's neck. DNA results from the epithelial cells would take additional time, but the physical match between belt and injury pattern was extremely compelling. The detectives also noted that Marcus had specifically cleaned this one belt while leaving other tools and equipment in the garage dusty and untouched. The selective cleaning indicated consciousness of guilt. He knew that specific item needed attention because he had used it to kill his wife. Additional evidence from the house included the couple's home computer. Digital forensics specialists had extracted the complete browser history and file structure. Marcus's user account showed he had researched strangulation methods 6 days before Sarah's murder. Specifically, he had visited websites discussing how long it takes for strangulation to cause death and whether victims can scream during the attack. He had also researched how to clean blood from vehicle interiors and whether bleach destroys DNA evidence. These searches were conducted during daytime hours when Sarah would have been at work. Marcus had used private browsing mode, but forensic tools recovered the cached data from system files. The searches demonstrated premeditation and planning. This wasn't a crime of passion or a sudden argument that escalated. Marcus had spent days researching how to kill his wife and cover up the evidence. Detective Chen shared findings from Sarah's phone records. Text messages between Sarah and Rebecca from the week before the murder showed Sarah expressing concern about Marcus's behavior. She wrote that he had been asking strange questions about her work schedule and what time she typically arrived home on her days off. She mentioned that he seemed obsessed with her location, constantly asking where she was going and when she would return. One text message from 5 days before her death read that Marcus had asked Sarah to update her life insurance beneficiary information. He claimed the insurance company sent a form requiring her signature. Sarah told Rebecca she found this odd because she didn't remember agreeing to life insurance in the first place. Rebecca had responded asking if Sarah wanted her to come over. Sarah declined, saying she was probably overthinking things, and Marcus was just trying to be financially responsible. This text exchange proved Marcus had lied during his interview. He claimed Sarah knew about the life insurance policy and had agreed to it. In reality, Sarah was confused and suspicious about paperwork Marcus was pressuring her to sign. The insurance company later confirmed that no such beneficiary update form existed. Marcus had fabricated that story to obtain Sarah's signature on documents she didn't fully understand. The prosecutor reviewed all evidence and determined they had sufficient probable cause for an arrest warrant. The combination of physical evidence, digital evidence, financial motive, and timeline inconsistencies created a compelling case. The prosecutor drafted the warrant application citing murder in the first degree with aggravating circumstances of financial gain. A judge reviewed the application and signed the warrant at 6:45 that evening. Detectives Harris and Chen drove to the Mitchell residence with backup officers at 7:20 in the evening. Marcus's truck was still impounded, but a co-worker had given him a ride home earlier. Lights were visible inside the house. The detectives approached the front door with arrest warrant in hand. Detective Harris knocked firmly. Marcus opened the door still wearing the same sweatpants and t-shirt from earlier. His expression showed surprise at seeing the detectives return so soon. Marcus Mitchell, you are under arrest for the murder of Sarah Mitchell. The detectives read him his rights again as they placed handcuffs on his wrists. Marcus protested, asking what evidence they had. He insisted they were making a mistake. He demanded to speak with a lawyer. Detective Chen informed him he would have that opportunity at the station. For now, he needed to come with them without resistance. Marcus complied, walking to the police vehicle without further argument. During the drive to the station, Marcus sat silently in the back seat. Unlike earlier when he stared out the window with artificial calm, now he fidgeted constantly. His leg bounced anxiously. His breathing quickened. The performance of control had crumbled now that actual consequences were imminent. This was the first genuine emotional response the detectives had witnessed from him all day. At the station, Marcus was processed through booking. His photograph was taken. His fingerprints were recorded. His personal belongings were inventoried and secured. He was provided with jail clothing and placed in a holding cell. He declined to make any statements without an attorney present. A public defender was contacted and agreed to meet with Marcus the following morning. While Marcus sat in his cell, Detective Harris received the preliminary DNA results from the lab. The skin cells recovered from under Sarah's fingernails belonged to Marcus Mitchell. The probability of the sample belonging to anyone else was less than 1 in 7 billion. Sarah had scratched her husband hard enough during her murder to leave his DNA embedded under her nails. This was the definitive physical link between Marcus and the crime. The blood recovered from Marcus's truck door handle also matched Sarah's DNA profile. Despite his cleaning efforts, enough sample remained for positive identification. Sarah had been in that truck bleeding. The only explanation was that Marcus had transported her body in his vehicle exactly as investigators theorized. Every piece of physical evidence corroborated the prosecution's timeline of events. Detective Chen compiled the complete case file for the prosecutor's office. The file documented the timeline of Sarah's final day. She had left her mother's house at 5:15 in the afternoon after their weekly coffee visit. She drove to Walmart, arriving at 2:23, based on parking lot security footage. She shopped for 27 minutes, purchasing gardening supplies. She left Walmart at 2:51, according to the timestamp on her receipt. Sarah drove home, arriving at approximately 3:10, based on traffic camera footage showing her vehicle on nearby streets. She brought her gardening purchases into the garage. She went inside the house and prepared food from the meal prep containers in the refrigerator. She ate while likely catching up on household tasks or relaxing on her day off. At some point between 4:30 and 5 in the afternoon, Marcus came home from work. The detectives theorized that Marcus parked his truck in the garage as usual. Sarah would have had no reason to be alarmed by her husband arriving home. Marcus had planned this carefully, waiting for a day when Sarah wasn't working and wouldn't be missed for several hours. He had already researched his method. He had already established his motive through the life insurance policy. He had already decided this was the day his wife would die. The confrontation likely happened quickly. Marcus grabbed the work belt from its hook in the garage. He approached Sarah from behind while she was distracted. He looped the belt around her neck and pulled tight. Sarah fought desperately. She scratched his arms and hands, drawing blood and skin cells under her nails. She struggled violently enough to cause defensive injuries to her own hands as she clawed at the belt, cutting off her air supply. Marcus maintained pressure for 3 to 4 minutes, according to the medical examiner's analysis. He held the belt tight while Sarah's struggles gradually weakened. He continued even after she lost consciousness, ensuring she would not survive. This wasn't a moment of rage. This was cold, calculated execution of his wife in their family home, while she believed she was safe. After Sarah was dead, Marcus faced the problem of disposing of her body and creating an alibi. He had already decided on Riverwalk Park as the dump site. The location held sentimental value from their relationship, which would seem tragically ironic to investigators. Marcus wrapped Sarah's body in a tarp from the garage. He dragged her to his truck and lifted her into the bed. This created the scratches on his tailgate and deposited the fiber evidence. Marcus drove to Riverwalk Park, arriving at approximately 5:41, based on cell tower data. He backed his truck close to the walking trail near the creek. He removed Sarah's body from the truck bed and carried or dragged her to the location where she was eventually found. He positioned her face down in the dirt near the water. He returned to his truck and used bottled water to rinse visible blood from the tailgate and bed liner. Marcus then faced another problem. Sarah's car was at home. If she supposedly disappeared while out somewhere, her car couldn't be in the garage. He drove back to his house, arriving around 6. He moved Sarah's car from the garage to the street. He drove the car back to Riverwalk Park, arriving around 6:20. He parked in the parking lot, placed Sarah's purse on the passenger seat with her phone inside, locked the doors, and walked back to where his truck was hidden. Marcus drove home again, arriving around 6:45. He hid the gardening supplies Sarah had purchased because their presence in plain sight would contradict the story of her disappearing while out running errands. He scrubbed his work belt, attempting to remove Sarah's DNA. He cleaned his truck's interior, focusing on areas where Sarah's body or blood made contact. He mopped the garage floor and wiped down surfaces. He took a shower, washing Sarah's blood from his hands and arms. By 8 o'clock, Marcus had completed his cover-up. He spent the evening watching television and establishing his alibi of being home alone. He waited until almost 10 before calling Sarah's phone, knowing it would go to voicemail since the phone was locked in her car. He called Patricia and Rebecca, creating the appearance of a concerned husband looking for his missing wife. He filed the missing person report at 9:53, carefully noting the time to establish his cooperation with police. Everything was planned. Everything was calculated. Marcus believed he had committed the perfect crime. He had a solid alibi through his work shift. He had eliminated physical evidence through cleaning. He had staged the scene to suggest Sarah had driven to the park alone, where something happened to her. He had established himself as the worried husband desperately seeking his missing wife. He would wait a respectful period after her death, then quietly collect the $500,000 life insurance payout and move on with his life. What Marcus didn't anticipate was how quickly investigators would identify him as the primary suspect. He didn't account for Rebecca's observations about Sarah's bruises and changed behavior. He didn't realize Patricia would remember that Sarah seemed happy and gave no indication of planning to go anywhere that evening. He didn't consider that his own performance of grief would be so transparently fake that detectives would immediately recognize his guilt. Most critically, Marcus didn't understand how advanced forensic science had become. He believed cleaning with bleach and soap would eliminate evidence. He didn't know that DNA could be recovered from microscopic samples. He didn't realize that fiber evidence could place Sarah's body in his truck. He didn't consider that cell tower data would contradict his timeline. He thought he was clever enough to outsmart modern investigative techniques. He was wrong. The case against Marcus Mitchell was presented to a grand jury on March 15th. The grand jury heard testimony from Detective Harris, the medical examiner, and forensic specialists. They reviewed photographs, DNA reports, cell phone records, and digital evidence. After 3 hours of deliberation, the grand jury returned an indictment on charges of murder in the first degree, with special circumstances of lying in wait and murder for financial gain. Both special circumstances made Marcus eligible for enhanced sentencing. Marcus remained in Warren County Jail without bond. His public defender filed motions challenging the admissibility of certain evidence, but the judge denied most of these motions. The physical evidence was overwhelming. The digital evidence demonstrated premeditation. The financial motive was clear and documented. The prosecution had built an airtight case that would be nearly impossible to defend against. 6 weeks after his arrest, Marcus's attorney approached the prosecutor with a plea offer. Marcus was willing to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a sentence of 25 years to life, with the possibility of parole. The prosecutor rejected this offer immediately. The evidence supported first-degree murder charges, and the victim's family deserved full justice. There would be no plea deal that reduced Marcus's culpability or minimized his crime. The trial was scheduled for September 22nd, 2025. Jury selection took 3 days. The prosecution and defense questioned dozens of potential jurors, seeking 12 people who could fairly evaluate the evidence. The final jury consisted of 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from 23 to 68. All confirmed they could impose a life sentence if evidence warranted. The prosecution's opening statement laid out the timeline and evidence methodically. The prosecutor described Sarah Mitchell as a dedicated nurse, loving daughter, and loyal friend who had her entire life stolen by the one person who promised to protect her. The prosecutor explained how Marcus Mitchell had carefully planned his wife's murder, motivated by greed, and enabled by Sarah's trust in her husband. The defense's opening statement was brief. Marcus's attorney argued that the prosecution's case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. They claimed the DNA under Sarah's nails could have come from innocent contact between spouses. They suggested the cleaned belt was simply Marcus doing chores and had no connection to the murder. They proposed that an unknown third party killed Sarah at the park, and Marcus was being railroaded because police needed to solve the case quickly. The prosecution called 23 witnesses over 8 days of testimony. Patricia Reynolds testified about her last visit with Sarah and how happy her daughter seemed. Rebecca Hoffman testified about the bruise she saw and Sarah's question about whether divorce was always necessary. Co-workers from the Toyota plant testified about Marcus's behavior the day of the murder. Several noted he seemed distracted and checked his phone more frequently than usual. The medical examiner walked the jury through Sarah's injuries in detail. She explained how the ligature marks on Sarah's neck matched the pattern of Marcus's work belt. She described the defensive wounds, proving Sarah fought for her life. She presented the timeline of Sarah's death based on stomach contents and lividity patterns. Her testimony was clinical and devastating. Forensic experts testified about the DNA evidence. They explained how skin cells under Sarah's fingernails positively matched Marcus Mitchell. They described the blood found in his truck despite cleaning attempts. They discussed the fiber evidence linking Sarah's body to the truck bed. Each piece of physical evidence was presented with scientific certainty that left no room for doubt. Digital forensic specialists testified about Marcus's internet searches. The jury saw screen captures of his research into strangulation methods, cleaning blood, and destroying evidence. They saw the timeline of searches occurring in the week before Sarah's murder. The premeditation was undeniable. Marcus had spent days planning how to kill his wife and get away with it. The insurance agent who sold Marcus the policy testified about their interaction. He confirmed that Marcus specifically requested a $500,000 policy on Sarah, but only $100,000 on himself. He stated this was unusual because spouses typically insured themselves equally. He also testified that Marcus never brought Sarah to any appointment, and that Marcus provided all of her information himself, including her signature on documents. Detective Harris provided the most comprehensive testimony spanning 2 full days. He walked the jury through the entire investigation, from the discovery of Sarah's body to Marcus's arrest. He explained every inconsistency in Marcus's statements. He detailed the cell tower evidence, placing both Marcus and Sarah near the park at the critical time. He described Marcus's complete lack of genuine emotional response during interviews. His testimony painted Marcus as a calculating killer who showed no remorse. The defense called only 2 witnesses. A forensic scientist they hired suggested contamination could explain the DNA evidence, though she admitted under cross-examination that contamination was unlikely given the multiple independent samples. A psychiatrist testified that some people process grief internally and may not display expected emotional responses. The prosecution easily dismantled both testimonies with pointed questions and reference to established science. Marcus's attorney ultimately decided not to put Marcus himself on the stand. The risk was too great. The prosecution would destroy him under cross-examination. His flat affect and inability to show genuine emotion would convince the jury of his guilt more effectively than any evidence. Keeping him silent was the only strategic option, though it denied the jury any explanation in his own words. Closing arguments began on October 7th. The prosecutor systematically reviewed every piece of evidence. She reminded the jury that Marcus had motive through the insurance policy. He had opportunity during the critical time window. He had means through access to his wife and the murder weapon. His own DNA was under her fingernails from her desperate struggle. His own internet searches proved he planned every detail. His own cleaned belt matched the marks on her neck. The prosecutor ended by asking the jury to deliver justice for Sarah Mitchell, a young woman whose only crime was trusting her husband, a woman who fought for her life, while the man who promised to love and cherish her choked the breath from her body. A woman whose family and friends would never see her again because Marcus Mitchell valued $500,000 more than his wife's life. The defense's closing argument lasted only 30 minutes. Marcus's attorney argued reasonable doubt based on the lack of eyewitnesses and reliance on circumstantial evidence. He suggested police tunnel vision prevented them from considering other suspects. He claimed the prosecution's timeline had gaps that created uncertainty. His argument felt hollow and unconvincing even to observers in the courtroom. The jury deliberated for 6 hours over 2 days. They requested to review the DNA evidence, the photographs of the work belt and Sarah's injuries, and Marcus's internet search history. They asked clarifying questions about cell tower technology. At 2:37 in the afternoon on October 9th, they informed the bailiff they had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled with Sarah's family and friends, investigators who worked the case, and members of the media covering the trial. Marcus was brought in wearing a suit his attorney had provided. His face showed no emotion as the jury filed in. The judge asked if they had reached a unanimous verdict. The foreperson confirmed they had. The clerk read the verdict. On the charge of murder in the first degree, the jury found Marcus Mitchell guilty. On the special circumstance of lying in wait, guilty. On the special circumstance of murder for financial gain, guilty. Patricia Reynolds sobbed openly in the gallery. Rebecca held her hand tightly. Marcus showed no reaction whatsoever. He simply stared straight ahead, as though the verdict had nothing to do with him. Sentencing was scheduled for November 3rd. The prosecution requested life without the possibility of parole based on the special circumstances and the calculated nature of the crime. The defense requested the minimum sentence, arguing Marcus had no prior criminal history. Victim impact statements were heard from Patricia, Rebecca, and 3 of Sarah's co-workers. Patricia spoke directly to Marcus. She described the daughter she raised and how much joy Sarah brought to everyone who knew her. She explained that Sarah had trusted Marcus completely and that he exploited that trust in the most evil way imaginable. She said she would never forgive him and hoped he spent every remaining day of his life remembering what he had taken from the world. Marcus stared at the table in front of him, showing nothing. The judge reviewed the evidence and the jury's findings. He stated that Marcus Mitchell had committed one of the most cold-blooded murders he had encountered in 30 years on the bench. The planning, the execution, the cover-up, and the complete absence of remorse demonstrated an individual devoid of basic human empathy. The judge sentenced Marcus Mitchell to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Marcus was immediately remanded to state custody to begin serving his sentence. As guards escorted Marcus from the courtroom, he looked back once at the gallery. His eyes met Patricia's for a brief moment. Still no emotion, no apology, no acknowledgement of the devastation he had caused. He turned away and disappeared through the door leading to the cells below the courthouse. It was the last time Sarah's family saw the man who murdered her. Marcus Mitchell is currently incarcerated at Kentucky State Penitentiary in Eddyville. He is 53 years old and will die in prison. He has filed multiple appeals claiming ineffective counsel and challenging the DNA evidence. Every appeal has been denied. The courts found the evidence overwhelming and the trial fair. There is no pathway to freedom for Marcus Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell's family established a scholarship fund in her name at the nursing school she attended. The scholarship supports students pursuing careers in intensive care nursing. Patricia remains active in victim advocacy, working with families who have lost loved ones to domestic violence. Rebecca speaks at events about recognizing warning signs in relationships and trusting instincts when something feels wrong. The case of Marcus Mitchell stands as a reminder that evil can hide behind ordinary appearances. A suburban house, a stable job, a seemingly normal marriage. But beneath the surface was a man capable of murdering his wife for money and attempting to fake grief to cover his crime. The detectives who investigated the case credited their success to following the evidence wherever it led and recognizing that Marcus's performance of emotion was just that, a performance lacking any genuine human feeling.